about uranium too.
What happened in Michigan was that you had a Republican governor who wanted to basically disempower a city that was, frankly, largely African-American city.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we've got Sam Seder going head-to-head with Tim Pool, and things get heated when they start unpacking gun regulation, Supreme Court politics, and how Republicans have played some seriously dark games to win elections. Sam comes through with historical receipts that are absolutely brutal, and Tim tries to defend his position, but ends up walking into some serious contradictions. You're going to want to stick around for the whole thing because the way this conversation unfolds is honestly wild. Before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're tuning in from. I always love seeing where you all are watching. All right, let's get into it.
I think that probably the reason is that we have a court that decided in 2008, after almost 200 years in this country of not perceiving an individual right to carry a gun, but only in the context of being a well-regulated militia, that because the court has lurched so far to the right over the past 2 decades, particularly most recently, that I think the idea is that you chip away at this from a legal perspective to try and build a legal precedent by doing, whatever. I mean, I'm not familiar with that specific regulation, but I would imagine that's the idea. We're going to get as much regulation as we can in this. I don't know, what's the damage done by that? Maybe from the perspective.
Made people felons who have an archaic, it's unfair to call it archaic, I guess, but like the M1 Garand is like a Vietnam weapon. And the M1A is a more modern version, but it's like a wood stock, and it's got it was a 308. The SCAR 20S is a modern AR-15 style variant, which is substantially more efficient.
Well, I am definitely in favor of outlawing, all of them, if that makes it easier.
Every single one.
Well, I listen. I think that people. I have no problem with people using weapons that are specifically for hunting. That's I'm okay with that, but
see how I segued into guns now?
Well, I'm happy to, I mean, it's absurd, I think.
It's a bit of a forced segue.
But, the Supreme Court has lurched to the right, and we have
agree.
2 Supreme Court justices on the right who I think want to retire in Alito and in Clarence Thomas, and I would love Donald Trump not to have the opportunity to appoint their successors.
I don't want to go too. I want to stay on the guns for a bit, but the sign's pointing to a Trump victory. It doesn't mean he's going to win. I don't know if he's going to win.
Didn't you tell me we were driving up and somebody asked me if I'd been on your show before, and I said, yeah. I don't know what show it was because you got so many, but
it was actually this channel.
Okay,
that was like 7 years ago.
And nobody can find that interview, but I'm quite convinced that you also predicted a Trump victory then, and that must have been it was pre-COVID.
Well, this was like 2017, 2018.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe not, but I'm pretty sure it was.
I mean, I am unclear as to who's going to win this election. Nobody knows. I see positive signs for Harris, but I can't tell if that's me being aspirational or not. So,
well, I would certainly say I learned my lesson with 2020, right? So I'm looking at, for instance, Moody's Analytics, and they always release this economic report where they're like, here's our projections, and they tout how it's historically accurate. And then what I think I saw was there was an increase in support for Trump. And what I thought I was calling out accurately was an increase in opposition to Trump, but the opposition certainly was greater. But I think the biggest function of 2020 was Republicans just don't know how to win elections. That's why I think the last Republican to win a popular vote was it Reagan, I think?
Well, Bush in his second election did, but he did that by basically coming out and bashing gay people and driving out
war.
No, I think that was actually despite the fact, I mean, in the wake of 9/11, there was a lot of intimidation by the Republicans, and they attacked a lot of Democrats for being, Max Cleland, who lost both his arms and his legs or an arm and two of his legs, I think it was. He was running for re-election in Georgia, and they called him Osama bin Laden.
This is the constitutional history lesson every American needs to hear. When Sam Seder breaks down how the Supreme Court interpreted gun rights for almost 2 centuries, he's exposing something massive that conservatives conveniently forget. For 200 years, the Second Amendment was understood in the context of a well-regulated militia. That's not opinion, that's documented constitutional interpretation. Then in 2008, suddenly the court decides there's an individual right that apparently nobody noticed for 2 whole centuries, and Sam nails it when he says the court has lurched so far to the right over the past 2 decades. Here's what makes this so important. The conservative movement loves to talk about originalism and constitutional purity, but when you actually look at the original interpretation of the Second Amendment, it completely contradicts their modern position. The founders weren't imagining every citizen stockpiling AR-15s. They were talking about organized militias for state defense. And notice how Tim can't really counter this historical fact. He pivots to complaining about specific gun models being banned, but that's not addressing the fundamental constitutional argument Sam just made. The Supreme Court changing 200 years of interpretation isn't normal judicial evolution. It's ideological capture. When Sam says he'd ban all of them if it makes it easier, people might think that's extreme. But here's the thing. He's being honest about his position instead of hiding behind twisted constitutional arguments. At least there's intellectual consistency there. The part about Alito and Clarence Thomas wanting to retire is crucial too. These aren't neutral arbiters of justice. They're ideological appointments waiting for the right political moment to be replaced by even more extreme versions of themselves. That's not how a functioning democracy should work.
Wow.
But yeah, who knows? Hillary Clinton had a 95% chance of winning, and the 5% came in. So I don't. Let's get back to. I'm going to ask you about the Supreme Court, because it sounds like you have a problem with how their right would shift. Is that right?
The first challenge is like right and left mean different things in different areas of governance and culture and things like this. So it's when we talk about right.
Well, I'm talking about in terms of the Supreme Court, in the context of what a Supreme Court does. I mean, they don't dictate culture so much as they dictate law.
No, what I mean is, like you say, rightward shift, and defining what right and left are in different contexts, I think, matters, because if we say,
in the context of the Supreme Court, rightward shift would be one which
traditionalist, I would say, versus progressive. That's what I'm trying to draw a distinction on, because like right economic is they're certainly not right economic to a certain degree.
The Supreme Court is not right wing in terms of economics.
So right economics to imply more like laissez-faire capitalism versus.
Oh my God, they're completely attacking the government's ability to regulate. They're completely attacking the government, and disempowering the government is basically saying, like, I mean, government is always.
That's not laissez-faire. Right?
It is almost definitionally laissez-faire, yes.
Well, no, like allowing large corporations to have revolving door policies and protections for large corporations is not
revolving door policies. What is that? What do you mean?
Like when, like the CEO of Halliburton gets a job in government or something like this, right?
Well,
when there's an exchange between the government.
Laissez-faire is where you basically buyer beware,
I think
it's a smokes. No, that's caveat emptor.
I know. That's why I'm insulting it.
Laissez-faire is where essentially, and I think it's a little bit of a smokescreen, but laissez-faire specifically means the government completely backs off and does not intervene in
right.
What's going on.
And what I'm saying is, I think many of these powerful elites that we would describe as right are in favor of protections for their buddies and their billionaires.
Well, the reality of neoliberalism, as it coming out of Mont Pelerin and the society, it was ultimately about a protection racket for a specific industry or a specific players within an industry.
But fair point. More rightward than like relative to where we are. Yes, completely agree.
No, it's just it's almost definitionally right.
Rightward shift. Yeah, I think I was pulling hairs.
Well,
but anyway, so I agree to a certain extent. I'm fairly modern on a lot of issues. I think there's got to be some push and pull. I think I'd like to see a Democratic Party that provides sound regulation in key areas that matter, like we're talking about lead and water and things like this. And then I'd like to see actually any party, I don't care who does it, like it's a sound reason to be like, hey, don't dump lead and garbage in our water. But at the same time, it's also to say, hey, we should reassess what we blocked and why we blocked it. Then maybe there's some regulations.
What specifically are you talking about?
The Max Cleland story is one of the most disgusting moments in modern American political history, and it perfectly captures Republican campaign tactics. Sam brings up how Max Cleland, who lost both his arms and his legs serving in Vietnam, was running for re-election in Georgia, and Republicans called him Osama bin Laden. Let that sink in. A triple amputee veteran who sacrificed his body for this country was compared to the terrorist who attacked America on 9/11. This wasn't some fringe group doing this. This was mainstream Republican campaign strategy in 2004. They questioned his patriotism because he voted against some version of the Homeland Security bill they wanted. This is what Sam means when he talks about Republican intimidation tactics. They wrap themselves in the flag and claim to support the troops, but the second a veteran doesn't vote their way, suddenly that veteran becomes a terrorist sympathizer. It's performative patriotism at its absolute worst. And this connects to the broader Supreme Court discussion. When Sam talks about how the court is attacking the government's ability to regulate and disempowering government institutions, he's describing a systematic dismantling of the administrative state. The same ideological movement that smeared Max Cleland is the one reshaping our entire legal system. The Mont Pelerin Society reference is fascinating because most people don't know what that is. It's this think tank founded in 1947 that basically created the intellectual framework for modern neoliberalism. When Sam calls it a protection racket for specific industries, he's absolutely right. The whole ideology of deregulation and free markets isn't actually about freedom. It's about protecting corporate power while dismantling any government entity that might check that power. Tim tries to push back on the laissez-faire capitalism critique, but notice he can't really defend it. He just argues about definitions while Sam is pointing out the actual result of these policies.
Like certain things to be deregulated?
Like what?
So the M1A, for instance, right? So I brought it to guns. My point is just in general. It's a specific example of where Democrats have regulated firearms in a way that makes literally no sense.
Okay, it makes no sense.
Do anything.
What's the downside here?
Making people felons for owning something while
How many of those people have been made felons by owning a
10,000? I don't know more.
10,000 felons. There are 10,000 felons in. When was this in Maryland?
You mean convicted?
No, you said felon. I'm just asking.
Right. So I'll give an example. The pistol brace ruling, right? So when the courts ruled that pistol braces made a pistol a short-barreled rifle, I actually had to dismantle a bunch of my weapons and separate. And there was no law passed. There was no act of Congress. This was ATF making an arbitrary decision that I was now committing felonies for simply having owned a legal product that I bought that was legal at the time. And Congress never passed this law. So now I risk prison over a nonsensical regulation.
You were talking about Democrats and
overregulating
things. But you just said that this was not a law that was passed. It was an assessment made by the courts.
No, it wasn't by the courts. It was the ATF, arbitrarily.
And
this is the Chevron ruling, that the agencies have a right to self-regulate and make their determinations. So the ATF, this is partly why people on the right were celebrating this, because the ATF was arbitrarily deciding that it was now a crime without any act of Congress. So we had to actually, I had to go dismantle.
So aside from these instances with you don't like some of these gun regulations, what other regulations do you have a problem with?
I don't know. I mean, there are certain things that I want to be regulated more than I think about in terms of deregulation. The lead in the water pipes is the easiest example.
Lead is actually.
And why isn't it being enforced is the question, I suppose. But
also, it is being enforced. I mean, the problem at what happened
about uranium too.
What happened in Michigan was that you had a Republican governor who wanted to basically disempower a city that was, frankly, a largely African American city. And
here's where Tim's argument completely falls apart, and Sam exposes the core problem with conservative complaints about regulation. Tim keeps saying Democrats have regulated firearms in a way that makes literally no sense. But when Sam asks for examples of other regulations that are problems, Tim can only talk about guns. That tells you everything. The pistol brace example is interesting because Tim frames it as government overreach, but then Sam catches him in a contradiction. Tim says he's complaining about Democrats over-regulating, but then admits this wasn't even a law passed by Democrats. It was an ATF ruling. So which is it? Is this about Democratic policy, or is this about how regulatory agencies function in general? This is the classic conservative bait and switch. They'll complain about Democrats and regulation in the same breath, even when Democrats didn't create the specific regulation they're upset about. It muddies the water intentionally because the real argument isn't about whether specific regulations make sense, it's about whether government should have regulatory power at all. And then Sam brings it back to what actually matters with the Flint water crisis example. You had a Republican governor who wanted to basically disempower a largely African American city. That's not speculation, that's what happened. The emergency manager law in Michigan gave the governor power to override local elected officials. And surprise, surprise, it was used almost exclusively in black communities. This is what regulation is actually supposed to prevent. When you remove government oversight and accountability, when you privatize essential services like water, the people who suffer are always the most vulnerable communities. Those kids in Flint got poisoned because someone decided saving money was more important than public health. So when conservatives complain about gun regulations while ignoring lead in drinking water, what does that tell you about their priorities? They're more worried about pistol braces than children being poisoned. That's not a serious policy position. That's ideological obsession. The broader point Sam keeps making throughout this whole segment is that regulation isn't the problem. WHO regulation benefits is the question. Every society regulates. The choice is whether those regulations protect ordinary people or whether they protect corporate profits. Republicans have made their choice abundantly clear, and Flint is the result. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.